Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you all today? I hope that you are always in a good health and stay safe at your home, or maybe some of you coming to office for work, but still stay safe. I always hope that we're always in a good health, and I expect that you guys already have lunch before because in a few minutes we will jump into an exciting discussion today. So please prepare your notes, open your eyes, open your ears, and open your mind widely because today we will have an excellent speakers. So welcome to Property Tokenization, the future of property. With me, Gheffiro, as the host for today's event that will guide you from the beginning to the end of the day. So FYI, this event is held between collaboration by Indonesian Blockchain Association and also Coinvestasi as well, with the purpose to educate and provide information to blockchain and crypto enthusiasts about what tokenization is, especially in property sector, along with its advantages and also disadvantages, how it works, how far it has grown, and what are the updates of tokenized property in 2022, both in Indonesia and also global? Well, I'm pretty sure that all of audience here are cannot wait to see the purpose and also to see the topics of the speaker today. But before we start, I want to welcome to Ms. Asih Karnesi, MM, as the chairwoman of Asosiasi Blockchain Indonesia to open today's event. So, Ms. Asih, please come forward.
Thanks, Jeff. So hello, distinguished participants, all speakers, ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends from the ecosystem. I'm pleased to welcome you to the Property Tokenization, the Future of Property webinar by Asosiasi Blockchain Indonesia and Coinvestasi that aims at showing the real estate industry that has yet to realize the remarkable potential of blockchain-enabled tokenization for tackling the existing market challenges. Wherever you turn, blockchain is everywhere. The technology has penetrated even to the dauntingly complex world of real estate. It has introduced the industry to tokenization, bringing the potential for greater transparency, liquidity, and inclusiveness. Over the past decade, the real estate market has been experiencing considerable growth, largely thanks to the upsurge in investment. And what's more, according to the report of Real Estate Market by Property and Business, Opportunity Analysis and Industry Forecast 2019 to 2026, it's expected that the global real estate market will reach $8,000 million by 2026. Nevertheless, property investment has long been considered something reserved for an exclusive group of wealthy individuals. It has also been behind the times in liquidity, automation, and regulation. However, thanks to blockchain and tokenization of real estate in particular, all these and many other related challenges have been successfully overcome. So the tokenization of real estate property, one of the principal use cases of blockchain in real estate, has yielded tremendous results. It helps asset and fund owners raise their capital more efficiently and provide investors with almost unlimited access to private real estate investments, along with better liquidity, greater transparency, and other eye-catching benefits. So you guys will discover the value it brings to issuers and investors and learn about the current real estate tokenization platforms with our expert speakers today. I believe that by participating in this webinar, we are in the right place and the right time. Together, let us accelerate the exchange of ideas and scaling up of good practices. So thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the webinar. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Ms. Asih Karnesi, for such wonderful opening remarks. So guys, without further ado, let's begin. First, we have first topic with the title, Get to Know About Tokenized Property and Learn How to Get Profit from It. This session will be delivered by Will Lee, founder and chairman of Shareable Assets. But first, let me introduce him briefly. Will Lee is the founder and chairman of Shareable Assets. Shareable Assets is a Singapore-based company with a capital market service license from the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, to issue digital securities. Will Lee studied computer science and applied mathematics and statistics at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, where he received his bachelor's degree. He obtained his master's degree in computer science specialized in AI from Stanford University. With his knowledge from studying AI at Stanford University, Will is on a mission of building a human-centered platform through the newest technologies. So, Willie, will you come forward to our screen today? So, Willie, how are you? Are you here already? So yeah, Willy, please unmute yourself first because we can hear your voice.
Okay. So can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you now. So please.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you for having me today and also my intro. So my name is Will and I'm the founder of Shareable Assets. So basically what we do is we provide a platform for offering security tokens, and we could actually tokenize basically you know, by using real estate underlying asset, we can provide debt capital market products and equity-based products and also funds. So basically what we do is we basically provide a financial instruments based out of real estate assets. And for now, there are two different ways to tokenize a real estate asset. One is we can set up SPV, special purpose vehicle, and special purpose vehicle actually owns underlying real estate asset, and then we can issue whether equities or issue debt capital or products, or we can create fund structures. And also second way is by working with the trust. Like for example, a bank, what we could do is a bank can become the legal owners of the properties and then can issue a beneficiary certificate. And then instead of we use a paper format, we can use token format to offer a beneficiary certificate. So we basically have two different ways to tokenize the real estate properties. Yeah. Can you go to the next slide now? Okay, so basically our company information is we started our company in Singapore 2019, and this is my third company, and I started my first company in Silicon Valley, and we are one of the first and few MAS licensed entities. So like I mentioned, we deal in capital market products in digital formats, and also we've been working with some like global banks such as Standard Chartered Bank. And also last year, our platform and infrastructures was showcased in both Hong Kong FinTech Festival and also Singapore FinTech Festival. And we've been providing our solution to Bank for International Settlements for HKMA's Retail Dream Bond Tokenization project called Project Genesis. And also we are shortlisted by MAS for CBD, Retail CBDC Global Challenge. Yeah, next slide. Oh, next slide, yeah. So for now, as I mentioned, at the moment, like we are not able to directly tokenize a real estate, meaning that in order for us to directly tokenize real estate properties, there needs to be a blockchain-based registry for real estate. But unfortunately, we don't have that kind of infrastructure at the moment. Then what we could do is, as I mentioned, we could create financial instruments based out of actual underlying asset, a real estate underlying asset. And we think that there's the current capital markets, market of fragmentations. It's because of market fragmentation, so we are not able to provide good liquidity, and also at the same time, because there's quite still a lot of intermediaries, so it is very inefficient to provide the token, the real estate based the tokens for investors. So what we do is we basically want we aim to digitalize this infrastructure for not just a real estate and also for other real estate, not just for real estate, also for other products. Yeah. Can you go to the next slide? So basically what we do is we are building a regulated DeFi, meaning that because as like securities companies and also infrastructure provider, what we could do is we can deploy our infrastructure for other securities companies, not just in Singapore and other countries, and if they have proper license in each region. Then for now, as you know, the DeFi is actually, even though it has very the powerful resource and also the infrastructures, because many of this DeFi network is not actually regulated. So what we do is we provide way for our partners to be regulated to deal in securities and funds products. And then these security tokens can be circulated through our own network. Like for example, if investors are under our network, and also if investors also under like another securities company in Indonesia, then what we could do is we can connect these two different markets through this regulated DeFi, so that when a seller and buyer, when they exchange their tokens, we basically use our own operation, our platform in Singapore, and also our partners in Indonesia, they can use their own license to finalize this transaction. This is the regulated DeFi that we built. Next page. So basically, like our investment product is not just a directly tokenized real estate asset. Basically, we can create in like equity format and debt capital market format, and also the funds format. So there is basically three different ways that we can create financial product, and also depends on the type of investment, type of asset class. There's a different way to actually take fee. Like for example, if the debt capital market product and if underlying asset is real estate, still we can take a small fee when we pay out the interest coupon payments and also interest payments, or when we have the maturity period, then we can take some fee based out of this the principal payments. And also the if it's equity format, then what we do is there needs to be nominee or director who manage the SPV, and also these nominee directors can manage this SPV and also underlying asset. So basically what we could do is we can facilitate this transaction as a platform provider for investors and also issuers, and then we can take a small fee by facilitating these transactions. And also for funds, in terms to set up the funds, we need to work with the professional fund managers, and they need to have a license, and then we can take some of the platform management fee between the investors and also fund managers by facilitating this relationship. Yeah. Please go to the next slide. So like so far, we have been successfully tokenized some small the real estate properties in UK. Most of them are student accommodations and also the senior care home. And then we tokenized this. That was 100% equity structures. And through this tokenization, so we are able to acquire around like 400 actual investors who funded this project. And then through this project, over 200,000 people, they downloaded our app. And then among them, around like 1,700 investors, they finalized their KYC AML. And based on this experience, even though we can take some small fee from the asset owners or issuer for us to tokenize their properties, but we think that because the size was small, so it wasn't really scalable. So right now, this year, our plan is instead of we tokenize one small properties, we plan to tokenize like 100, 200 small apartment units together in Vietnam, so that it could be an equity model or a fund model, so that we can scale up these real estate tokenizations. Yeah. Please, next slide. So this is actual like some of the like the project is in US dollar is $200,000 US, $150,000 USD to $300,000 projects. An interesting thing is because we provide we on behalf of issuers, we can provide automated like payment system, and by working with banks or custodians, so that by facilitating these transactions, we can also take small like a platform management fee, and not only we can take transaction fee between seller and buyers, we can also take this management fee by facilitating these transactions and also payments for investors. And also interesting thing is in each like small project, like 80 people or maybe 80 investors and sometimes 150 investors, they can co-own this real estate, and then they can become the legal owners of these properties. And because they are actually own these equities of SPV, which owns this underlying asset. Please go to the next slide now. And then this is the model in Vietnam. So what we do is, the structure is basically we can set up a local SPV in Vietnam, and then we can set up the foreign SPV in Singapore, so that because there's no legal framework in Vietnam at the moment, so that we can issue either the equities or a debt capital market product, or the unit in CIS collective investment scheme from the foreign SPV in Singapore. And then foreign SPV Singapore actually 100% owns local SPV in Vietnam, so that we can provide these structures for tokenizing like 100 to 200 residential apartments units in Hanoi.
Okay, Willie, I'm so sorry that your time is running out.
Oh,
So,
yeah, that was the last slide. Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you, Willie, for such a great explanation about tokenization before. Next, we'll move to second topic, with the title Tokenization of Real Estate in Practice, Basics, and Experiences. So this topic will be brought by Claus Skaaning, CEO and founder of DigiShares. So let me read his bio first. Okay. PhD in computer science, Claus has worked as a researcher and technical lead for Hewlett-Packard before founding his first company, DigiShares, a software company with focus on AI for diagnostics and troubleshooting. After heading DigiShares as a CEO for 12 years, Claus has both started and taken part in several successful ventures, with the latest being DigiShares, a fintech tokenization software company with subsidiaries in both Europe and the US, specializing in the issuance and ongoing management of tokenized securities. Claus has contributed chapters, knowledge, and insights to several books and publications on the blockchain technology and the tokenization of assets. Claus has also taught several masterclasses on the tokenization of real assets, real estate, use cases for tokenization software, and also the tokenization ecosystem. So, Mr. Claus, are you ready for your presentation today?
Yes, I am.
So,
please go.
take your time.
All right, I just start. I should just begin.
Yeah, just begin your presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a great pleasure to speak here. Could you move to the first slide?
Okay, let's move to presentation. Right.
Yeah, we can go to the next slide. That's okay. All right. Yeah, so my name is Claus Skaaning, and thank you for the nice introduction. I'm the CEO of a company called DigiShares. We are a provider of white label software for tokenization of real estate. It means we don't do any tokenization in our own company or under our own name, but rather through white label partners. So we sell a software platform that allows any real estate developer to tokenize their own assets, manage the process around this, and achieve the benefits that we normally see with tokenization. So tokenization can be defined as is written here, the process of issuing a blockchain token that digitally and legally represents a security, possibly associated with an underlying asset. The goal is really to find a way to represent assets such as real estate as tokens on the blockchain, so we can get the same benefits that we have with digital currencies such as Bitcoin. So we can, to a much higher degree, digitize and automate processes. We can automate compliance and governance. We can remove human errors in the process. We can increase liquidity. We can make it extremely easy to trade real estate and increase the liquidity a lot. We can fractionalize, democratize, make it easier for smaller investors to participate. And we can also benefit from the global ecosystem of the blockchain and the crypto world. There are many benefits. Let's move to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? So if you focus on real estate, the benefits of tokenization are actually, I would say, extremely large. Real estate is, of course, plagued by very costly paper-based, time-consuming processes. It's a very analog industry. It hasn't been digitized to a high degree, and there's almost zero liquidity. With tokenization, we can help remediate these problems. We can digitize and automate processes and just make it much more efficient. So we can eliminate the need to have a large back office in a real estate operation, and instead automate processes relating to subscription of new investors, trading among investors, and any kind of process, distribution process, and so on, can be automated to a high degree. We can also make it possible for the real estate investors to trade their assets. This is actually the main benefit, I would say. Real estate has an illiquidity premium of 20 to 30%. So if we can make real estate assets tradable, we can actually increase the value of the assets with 20 to 30%. And the way to see this quite easily is that if you have the opportunity to invest into two different assets that are exactly the same, but one is liquid and the other is not, which one would you choose? So it's a simple argument. In addition to that, I would say that with our platform and similar platforms, the real estate developer gets much more control and flexibility over the process of tokenization, and can, to a large degree, specify and control himself how to tokenize the different properties from a business and legal perspective. There's a lot of secondary gains that are also important, but I would say automation and liquidity are the main factors that we see. Could we go to the next page? There are also a lot of barriers to adoption still. The market is not totally mature. Crypto and blockchain itself is not yet trustworthy and comfortable for many people. So this is a hurdle that we have to overcome, but it's becoming much easier and it's becoming much more adopted as we speak. And also we have ways to sort of reduce the crypto and blockchain visibility within our system so that normal investors can much more easily use it. On the compliance and legal side, as was also hinted to by Will, it is very fragmented landscape that we see globally. Few countries have legislation in place for tokenization, and many countries sort of indirectly support it to some degree and may support it through a discussion with the regulator or through a local legal partner. We are constantly mapping out this legal framework around the world and have updated knowledge about who can support it and who cannot. In Asia and Southeast Asia, we find Singapore as a relatively good jurisdiction, but also Australia is actually really good. There are also some offshore jurisdictions that may work. And generally, we are happy to enter into discussions with legal partners in any country where you'd like to tokenize, as well as Indonesia. So we have good legal partners in Indonesia and can also possibly find a way forward there. On the cost side, it has also been extremely expensive to tokenize, but the costs are really coming down now. It's becoming more routine. Better tools are becoming available. So a lot of the market is sort of getting commoditized, and we see prices dropping a lot as we speak. And this is, I think, what has resulted in the market growing maybe with a factor 10 from 2020 to 2021. And I think a factor 10 again this year compared to last year. Then we get to the last point, and that's distribution and liquidity. These are also main factors that still limit the market growth. We have partnerships in place with the leading exchanges around the world, including T0 in the US, RTX in London, INX in the US, and also ADDX in Singapore. So we can actually tokenize assets and then get them listed on any of these exchanges for increased liquidity purposes. We also have contacts with marketing partners around the world that can help facilitate the sales of the real estate assets. Can you go to the next page? Next page. Here we see the tokenization process in detail. It has a business, a legal, and a technical process. I don't have time to go through it in detail, and also our company is primarily responsible for the technical process. But since we have done around 50 projects so far around the world, we have good experience also with the business and the legal side, and can actually guide any real estate developer through this process within normally 6 to 8 weeks. Let's go to the next page. These are examples of customer cases we're working on. We have customers in many countries, I think around 20 different countries in total, many different assets, commercial, residential, new development projects, assets that needs to be refinanced or financed from the start, so new development projects, or assets that needs to be sold, and so on, of many different sizes, from a few $100,000 up to $100 million. So many different examples, and you're welcome to contact us if you want to hear more about this. Let's go to the next page. Next page. This is our platform. It's a platform that supports the issuance, the corporate management, the trading of assets, and yeah, we can implement it with you in a few weeks, so you can get running and do the tokenization on your own. And I think I'm running out of time, so I'll stop here.
Well, no, still we have 1 minute more if you want to.
I think I covered what I wanted to say. I would say so. So yeah, liquidity. No, I'll just stop here. I think I covered what I wanted to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Claus Skaaning, for the great explanation about tokenization of real estate in practice, basics, and experiences. Thank you so much, Claus Skaaning.
Thank you.
All right, let's move into the last session or last topics today. We have topics with the name of topics: Learn how to create and launch property utility token by Marcus Lim, CEO and founder of Zipmex. So please let me read his bio first. Marcus is a person with a vision to make investing easy. With his strong business acumen, he oversees the entire regional expansion and development of Zipmex. He is an accomplished expert entrepreneur who previously founded oneflare.com.au, Australia's fastest growing marketplace for local services, which was acquired to form part of the domain group ASX DHG, and an expert in the digital assets industry. His vast experiences and expertise in digital assets has earned him speaking opportunities on Bloomberg, the Australian Financial Review, and the Business Times, Singapore, and many more. So, Marcus, are you ready for your presentation today?
Great, thanks a lot, everyone. Great to be here today. Really excited to share my thoughts around property tokenization. So just a quick introduction, Zipmex is a regional digital asset platform headquartered in Singapore. We're operating in Thailand, where we're licensed and regulated. In Indonesia, we're registered by BPPT, Singapore with MAS, and also in Australia. So I think with property over the last 12 months, it has been really interesting, simply because we've got a lot of quantitative easing from around the world, and there's a lot of money that's gone into the system. And because of COVID, people are not traveling, and so they're actually spending their money in buying physical assets, property being one of the largest ones. So property prices, as all of you know, around the world, has gone up significantly. What does that mean? That means that a lot of people can't really afford property, especially for first-time homeowners or investors in this space who are getting started in their career. So tokenization of property actually helps to solve a very huge problem, as we will start to experience moving forward, which is the ability to get access to investing into property without actually having to buy the entire property itself. So I'll go into my first slide. Cool. So, you know, property is a very profitable investment. It was seen over the last 2 decades. Anyone that have bought property, you know, back in the early 2000s and held on to that asset would have made a lot of money. On top of that, you know, renting out property has also attracted very high yields in certain countries, especially in Southeast Asia and Vietnam and Indonesia, and also in Thailand, where yields are actually much higher than banks. So this is where, you know, a lot of people see it as a safe haven kind of investment where they can put in and attract capital gains and on top of that yield. So the great thing about property is, in this day and age, is it can't be stolen. And obviously, there's title deeds that record all transactions that have been bought and sold. As I mentioned, property is a very attractive investment, both on the capital gain perspective and also on the yield. But as we all know, property is not as liquid as cash or gold. It is, you have to, go through a real estate agent to sell the property. And also with property prices skyrocketing, it becomes very difficult for people to achieve this as an investment. And that's why we're looking at tokenization as one way to solve this problem. So what is property tokenization and how it's achieved? So essentially, what people are doing right now, and a lot of previous speakers that I've spoken about, is custodizing, the actual real estate itself, whether it's commercial or residential. We'll go through a couple of case studies later on, whereby they custodize it and they essentially issue tokens that represent, a value of the property or a fraction of the property. So this is actually already exists in the traditional finance world. That's called REITs. And REITs are basically being traded now into multiple markets, in financial markets. In Singapore here, the REIT market is extremely strong, has existed for over 2 decades. But in other parts of Southeast Asia, for example, in Indonesia, REITs do not really kind of exist at all. So this is one way where property tokenization can actually leapfrog traditional finance. Instead of kind of investing into REITs, people can go directly into property tokens. There are a lot of benefits here as to why property tokens are better than REITs. So firstly, there is no minimum investment and lower transaction cost. Fractional ownership is extremely powerful. What we've seen with digital currencies is, you don't have to buy an entire Bitcoin. You can buy $1 of Bitcoin. And so you'll get a decimal amount of ownership. This basically breaks down and democratizes the ability for people to invest and also for ownership. So anyone with as little as $1 to as much as $1 million can buy or can start investing into property. And the really interesting thing here is that all the benefits that accrue to the property can also be distributed in an automated fashion eventually to all the actual owners of the token itself. So that the token itself actually represents shares. So the difference here with property tokens is that it's considered a security token. A security token actually has different sets of regulations compared to cryptocurrencies. And so that is typically regulated by central banks. Okay, so there are 2 ways of tokenizing the property. One is I mentioned, which is STO, security token offering. And the second one is issuing tokens as NFTs. So let's just go through the STO. So STO, basically, it's similar to kind of an IPO process in the token world. And essentially, this is where the new issuance of tokens are distributed to owners in the initial kind of offering. Those tokens can then be traded in the secondary market, which is something Zipmex is looking to do as an exchange. We already provide, trading for cryptocurrencies. So the token itself can also be traded on Zipmex, where we're looking to launch first in Thailand. So as all of you guys know, NFT non-fungible tokens are also tokens issued on the blockchain. It is a unique ownership. And this is really, quite interesting in terms of how these tokens can be distributed to owners, where you effectively kind of buy the whole token as opposed to a fractional of the token itself. And so some of these property developers are actually trialing out with NFTs, where you're basically kind of owning either kind of a unit within a kind of a residential property or in a commercial, and that unit is obviously kind of unique as opposed to an STO, which is a fungible token. Great. So the first case study here, we have Omni, based out in Spain. So, this is really interesting to start off with a, very small project. Investment starts at €100, and it's an annual interest per token. So, essentially investors can buy in to this development with a small amount of money, and then they'll be able to, attract the yield that's coming out from renting out the property itself. The second case study is based out in Thailand, Sansiri. So Sansiri is one of the largest property developers in Thailand. So they launched essentially kind of two tokens, which is the Siri Hub A and the Siri Hub B. And they raised a total of $70 million US. And now that token is actually traded on an exchange in Thailand, and Zipmex is looking to allow that trading to happen as well on our platform. The great thing about the token is that it attracts a yield as well of up to 8% per annum. And so the token can actually be traded throughout the exchanges for the next 4 years of the token's life. And then we have Labs Group as well. This is more of a timeshare NFT. This is, as you can see on the right-hand side, this is basically how much it costs to rent, the accommodation itself. And so, through a timeshare kind of model, you can actually buy the NFT token where people kind of are actually staying at the property itself. The yield gets attributed to the actual token itself, and then that gets passed on to the actual owners. Fantastic. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mario Slim, for your presentation about how to create a utility token property. So let's move. We have already watched the entire explanation from today's session. So let's move into the panel discussion and then continued by Q&A session. So the panel discussion will be led by Stephen Suhadi as a supervisory board of Asosiasi Blockchain Indonesia. Stephen Suhadi is a senior partner at Standard Alpha Blockchain Consulting Firm and also co-founder of Indonesia Crypto Network, the largest user acquisition platform for digital assets in Indonesia. Stephen graduated with honors from the University of Technology in Sydney. He has worked as innovation director at publicly listed company in Australia before coming back to Indonesia, where he is now also the supervisory board of Asosiasi Blockchain Indonesia, or Indonesian Blockchain Association. So Steve, this panel discussion will run about 40 minutes and then continued by Q&A session for about 30 minutes. So for you all audience here, if you guys have any question, please type your question on live chat box on YouTube. So Steve, please lead this session.
Great, thank you guys. Thank you for the speakers, Will, Klaus, and Marcus as well. I think we covered most of the, 101 explanation on property tokens. But I guess the first question I'd like to ask, probably starting with you, Will, and then followed by Klaus and then Marcus. What do you think the next 3 years specifically looks like for tokenization of property? Because I do recall specifically, for those of you who've sort of been around a lot longer, in 2017, there was a lot of hype, especially in 2018, I think it was, around security tokens. And that hype really hasn't come to fruition yet. And here we are sort of 3-4 years down the track. There have been projects, specifically, the ones Marcus has sort of just recently outlined in his presentation. But what do you think the next 3 years look like? Do you think the big developers will start coming in, or is it, will the sort of the industry still face a bit more, lag?
I think that is a good question, and I think it's still, for now, there's still inefficiency in terms of offering real estate-backed tokens, and the main reason is because we still need to issue, in order for an investor to have the investor legal rights, we need to securitize. So that being said, we need to set up SPV or needs to work with the bank. There's a lot of process. And I think that what we could see is in the next 2 to 3 years, there will be a government-owned the real estate registry. For example, in Thailand, Bank of Thailand, they provide infrastructures, securities infrastructures, so that they issue a Minister of Finance. They in Thailand they issue a native government bonds, and around like $300 million worth of government bonds actually directly issued from government infrastructures, and then that was actually offered and distributed by Krung Thai Bank in Thailand. But there is one case. But what we could see is, next step will be like, and it's one of the countries, will build, government-owned the registries, like blockchain-based registry, where people can directly register their properties. But that way, because government, their main priority is how they can efficiently and trace and track taxations. And I think that is the main key. So that if we could have the government-owned infrastructures, then there's possibility that instead of we use SFX securities, there might be a way that we can directly register the owners of the properties directly. So I think that could possibly happen in the next 2 to 3 years. And if that happens, then I think the true efficiency gain will be available in this market.
Right. And do you think, from a Southeast Asian perspective, Will, you say that could happen in the next 2-3 years. Which countries do you think are at the forefront of that?
I think that like Hong Kong and the Thailand and UAE, and also I think China. I think main reason is there is a project initiated, led by Bank for Internet Settlement, the project called the MCBDC or MBridge. So they are building the infrastructures where the securities and funds and the currencies can be actually available in these, four countries actually use the same infrastructures. So I think that these 4 countries might build these types of infrastructures, and I think then like definitely Indonesia could be the the next one, or maybe like can even like move faster once Indonesian government can learn how these countries are doing. So we are based in Singapore, and so we see some like interesting progress from Singapore and also Hong Kong. But interesting thing is like for now, Thailand is one of the most advanced countries in blockchain, and I think that like one particular reason is because some of the projects were driven by Thailand government. So I think that those 4 countries, and potentially like Singapore and Hong Kong, or even maybe Indonesia, because like as long as there's this infrastructure can make sure to provide the full traceability for taxation, then why not? Yeah.
Sure. And then Claus, what are your thoughts on the next 3 years?
Yeah, great question. First off, you're right. There was a lot of hype a couple of years ago, and you're saying it hasn't really come to fruition. Actually, I think it's happening now. We see huge interest. We get so many requests in from normal small to medium-sized real estate developers across the world who are interested in tokenization now. It has been a buzzword, but I think it's becoming much more mainstream now, and I think the value proposition is getting understood and getting realized. So today we can give them automation and digitization and reduction of administrative costs, and we can also give them liquidity to some degree, so they can get that immediately, and it has a lot of value for them. Over the next 3 years, I think we will see increasingly the bigger developers coming in. We are seeing it already now to some degree. So we've signed up a couple of really big developers who are trying out tokenization as proof of concepts, pilot projects to see how it can help their business. We also see interest from banks, insurance companies, large private equity funds. So it's starting already now. Tokenization is a buzzword, and I think that it will stay like that maybe a year or 2 into the future. But of course, tokenization will just become the normal way of doing things, I think, generally within a couple of years. I think that we will also see increasingly, as Will has said, the tokenization of the asset directly without securitizing it first. But I think that securitizing the asset first will still remain. It's been done in hundreds of years, in 100 years, right? So it's still also a good way to do it, and I think investor trust will be higher if they can get a tokenized share. So I'm not sure there will be that much difference in that. So yeah, that's my input.
And Marcus, what are your thoughts? Especially, you highlighted there's already vehicles in place or derivatives, I guess, in place in countries like Singapore, like you mentioned, REITs, and that doesn't exist in other regions. With tokenization of property in the next 3 years, do you think like derivatives like REITs will just simply pivot technology-wise to things like blockchain, or do you think another technology solution or another player would basically leapfrog existing players like REITs?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity for that leapfrogging of REITs. REITs also has a barrier to entry for a lot of investors to come in, and I think with property tokenization, it really kind of removes that barrier to entry and allow for mass market adoption. Typically, kind of any mom and dad retailer can't just get into a REIT fairly easily, but with tokenization, that fractional ownership just democratizes ownership a lot more. In terms of the next 3 years, I think the way this industry would shape out is, firstly, I think how property is being marketed. The way property is being marketed right now is for kind of the very traditional investors. And I think, to accelerate the adoption of owning, property tokens or people investing without actually seeing the property, because when you look at how people invest in property is they always go and see the property first. But I think with the pandemic that has happened, more and more people are actually investing in property without actually seeing it now. And I think the next leap forward is, perhaps how can we bring property investment into the virtual world, i.e. the metaverse, right? And so this is super, super interesting, is how can we mirror what's in the physical into the virtual, where it's marketed very differently to perhaps, I guess, a different class of audience that are more susceptible to investing online versus having to see something that's in the physical space. So I think that could definitely help to accelerate it. So for instance, you can have the physical property itself, and then you can also have the virtual property online, and where you buy the physical property or part of the physical property, you get an NFT in the metaverse, for instance, right? So I think that is something that is very, very interesting. And I think property developers are definitely looking into it. The second one is, of course, regulation. Like most industry, especially for, in the security world, regulations are still very unclear at the moment for all countries, as my previous speaker has mentioned. And this will probably take some time. I think, it is obviously in the best interest for the government to accelerate this, as property is a huge investment class in all countries. So where they can effectively tax and also manage the risk for retail investors, that will be a huge, positive impact. The third is obviously is infrastructure. This is still very new at this point in time, and there's a lot of infrastructure that's been built out to automate the way investment is done into property, or rather for property tokens. So I think with these three things, if they can kind of move in tandem at the right speed, then we can get, great adoption in the next 3 years.
Great. I might just stick with you, Marcus. For the next questions are more around liquidity. And, when we start tokenizing property, you touched on one point around there's probably, I guess, an amalgamation between it being crypto and being property and being, one vehicle. And from all three speakers, there's been everyone's touching on regulation, right? Do you think, stigma around the fact that it is, for example, a token? And there's still a lot of, I guess, stigma, especially in countries still like Indonesia, or especially countries where there is no regulation around crypto. And then now, on top of that, you've got property, or you're using property to back crypto. There's quite a, I guess, a layer there for especially traditional investors to wrap their head around, let alone governments. So I guess from that sort of marriage of crypto and property, what do you see the challenges there, and what's needed to sort of really break through that?
Sure. No, that's a very good point. Cryptocurrency previously had very negative stigma. And that's because of, the Silk Road and obviously what's being used previously for money laundering. And then obviously there's a ton of bad actors and scams that have happened. And when we move into a very traditional asset class like property, it's kind of like hot and cold. So I think the bridge, the way the bridge is going to happen is, for the initial, property tokens that are coming out, they need to be well vetted and established, right, by actual, big property developers, and to some extent, assisted by the government, right, to ensure, these kind of first few investments go extremely well and are profitable for the investors that are coming in. With that sets a benchmark, right, for all other players that are coming into this space. So that's how, people can gain confidence, because at the end of the day, it's a confidence game. And so, it's not just from the private sector, but also from the government itself needs to support this industry so that we can kind of build that public trust.
Claus, what are your thoughts on liquidity in market? Specifically, if, for example, I'm a property developer and I'm building a building in central Jakarta, and obviously I'm tokenizing it and I'm selling it. Moving forward, do you think, how do I as a developer solve the problem of getting enough liquidity and, from a traditional, for example, crypto perspective, having enough of an order book so that specific building continuously remains liquid? Or do you think that's sort of, somewhat of a pipe dream for each individual property to have strong liquidity?
It's a great question, right? And it is also a little bit like the holy grail, I think, for the industry here. How do we build enough liquidity for any kind of real estate asset? I think it's going to come in different stages and at different levels. So already now you can get platforms that give the real estate developer the ability to support internal trading in his assets, right? So without any kind of paperwork and just as an automated process. So already that is going to give liquidity to some degree, especially if they fractionalize and have a lot of investors in the assets. They will be able to support trading internally and make it very easy for their investors to buy and sell. Of course, there may not be an order book, and it will be limited only to their own investors and anyone sort of within their own network. So the next step up, I think, will be a regulated exchange like ADDX, for instance, in Singapore. Most tokenization platforms have partnerships in place, like we do, with regulated exchanges, so that we can take the assets that we tokenize and get them listed on a regulated exchange. That's going to give some degree of liquidity, but I think the general consensus is that if you have new development projects, for instance, that are not yield generating, you're not going to see a lot of liquidity on a regulated exchange, and especially not when there will be thousands of these projects in the future. So I'm skeptical how much that's going to help. Then I think that the third level is when we start to see DeFi, the DeFi world integrate with the world of real world assets, and we see decentralized exchanges starting to trade tokenized assets. And I think that could potentially actually give a lot more liquidity, because there is a lot of interest to get access to real world assets from the DeFi world. They want to have access to more trustworthy and more valuable, stable assets. And there's also a lot of interest from the other side to get liquidity and to get access to DeFi lending and yield generation and staking and so on with their assets. So I think this is actually my hope, that we will see the liquidity coming from this area.
And one thing that I also wanted to add is, like, I think that in order to provide the enough liquidity, there needs to be three things. Like, first one is the clear legal frameworks and also infrastructure for taxations. And second thing is the investor protections. And the last one is the the registries. Like, for example, even though the Claus mentioned that like ADDX, but for now the problem is, if we securitize real estate, then there is a high possibility that the product is actually designed for only accredited and institutional investors, not a retail investor, because of funds formats. So because of that, like, if only let's say 20 people or 30 people own maybe 10 million or 20 million or maybe the $50 million worth of real estate properties, then it will be very difficult to create a liquidity. So that being said, like because of securities and bonds, meaning that either we create like expensive the prospectus, or there needs to be a government-owned infrastructure to recognize, okay, this is not securities, this is actually direct ownership of these properties. And second thing is the investor protection side, like there's many different ways that we can tokenize a real estate properties, like like NFT model or maybe security token model. But at the end of the day, like it's most important thing is whether we can provide this investor protection mechanisms. Then there is a way that we can provide ample liquidity. But for now, even though we have this like one, it's very difficult to provide investor protection if we use an NFT model. And if we use a securities model, then it is very inefficient, meaning that we need to pay a lot of money for preparing a prospectus. And also we need to update this ownership, legal ownership every time of government-owned like CDP or CSD, security depository. So this kind of thing is still needs to be improved in order to provide the liquidity, and especially the real estate is like technically it could be owned by personal, but we can't move this like the real estate, meaning that how we can handle this like efficiently handle these taxations. Then probably like accessibility could be provided, and after we could have accessibility, then we can provide liquidity to investors.
Right, thanks, Will. Maybe just cycling back to you, Marcus, on this point of liquidity and what Will was saying, specifically about investor protection. When we start to fractionalize asset, there's a lot of retail investors flooding into the market. One, I guess, potential scenario that could happen is if, for example, what's happening in the US, where interest rates are seemingly about to go up, a lot of the retail investors sort of just basically start selling. Right, and this could potentially create a cascading effect, whereas traditionally property, from a liquidity perspective, has been very slow to move, right? And the transactions are quite lagged compared to things like cryptocurrency. And when we move it into markets, for example, like if you guys in Zipmex are listing various properties, then the speed at which things are getting traded, just exponentially have increased. But coming back to investor protection, that could also have a downside whereby there could be selling basically rapidly happening for a specific building, for example. What are your views on, I guess, that liquidity aspect, and also from the shorting of assets, specifically on the impact as well for developers?
Okay, so this is my personal view, and I think that like this is providing markets, like for example, like NFT market or asset tokenizations. I don't think that they are mainstream. And like that being said, I really think that blockchain business is kind of infrastructure business, meaning that when we say like Ethereum's or like Stellar or maybe Tezos, like we call these a layer one networks, right? But I think that like at the moment, like with the layer one network, it is quite difficult, or sometimes it's almost impossible to decentralize certain industries or certain countries. So we need to zoom out and need to see the entire pictures. But that being said, there needs to be a layer zero network. And like I know that there's some like project called layer zero, but my definition of layer zero is like a government-owned registry. And once we can have that infrastructures, even though it's a private chain based and public chain based, if we can connect this government-owned registry with public chain layer one, then clearing and settlements and reconciliation can be done separately, but we just need to simply like connect, like interoperability or interchain based or sidechain based. So that is, I think, that what really needs for us to provide like proper liquidity and even like investor protection. Because at the end of the day, like let's say I can also make private notes with my friends to pay money back, but who can actually, if I need to hire, if there's some like the conflict, if I need to hire lawyers and explain, then like it will be very complicated, right? That is why we already have some system called securities in the capital market, and then there is actually a registry that government can recognize to make sure whether this product actually create properly and actually distribute properly as well. So I think that this is the key. If not, it seems like we could make some like liquidity, but it's not like probably like healthy liquidity, and then it might cause some like hype, and then even though we use real estate property, it's still like in the real estate industry, there's a lot of disputes and conflicts and legal cases. But if we don't have any of this one, then it will be even worse. So I think that like there needs to be a layer 0 the network can be connected with the layer 1. Then there is a possibility that we can provide both liquidity and investor protections, because they can automatically capture this taxation issue that what a government is really care about.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Marcus, what are your thoughts from exchange perspective on the liquidity discussion of property?
Sure. So I think liquidity is kind of broken up, perhaps into kind of two segments. One is retail and the other one is institutional. If we kind of look at property investment versus cryptocurrency investment, it's vastly different. With crypto, there is no way to ascertain the real price of a token. You have to kind of look at the network effect, for instance, or how the utility of the actual ecosystem itself. Whereas with property, like kind of most security assets, there's a way to value it. And so, it can be presented in a way where, if something is undervalued, then institutionals or retail can be, positioned to come in and, and invest in it, right? So if something is severely undervalued, if we know that the yield is sustainable over the last 3 or 4 years, and, the assets are now trading at a much lower price, then, it's very clear and transparent for people to go, this is undervalued, I can go in and buy, right? So I think liquidity will be a function of, one, how the investment is, optically presented to the investors, and two is also a function of the actual number of customers or users on the platform itself. I think if we look at Centuri project, they raised $70 million in their STO. But the token itself is not well traded on the exchange, but that's because it's a function of the number of users. They don't have many users on their platform itself. So I think to solve the liquidity issue is something that we're working together with them on, so we can get much more of that kind of transaction value happening. In terms of the actual risk to retail investors, I think if we kind of look at the traditional world, if you look at the stock market, for instance, there are circuit breakers that are in place. Something that we as an exchange, together with the regulators, could implement, as a way to kind of de-risk investors during times of huge volatility. So something that we have never kind of done for our traditional or our cryptocurrency exchange, because obviously crypto has no kind of circuit breaker. Bitcoin can drop for 50% in a day if they wanted to. But with security tokens, I think this is something perhaps that can be embedded into regulation to provide some investor protection.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess, I might just cycle it back to the three of you as well before we move on to audience questions. But there potentially is a few property developers from Indonesia watching, and I wanted just to get some quick fire answers from the three of you. So, if I'm a property developer from Indonesia, can you tell me sort of like your two main reasons, maybe starting with yourself, Marcus, while I have you, why I shouldn't do tokenization now, like this year in 2022?
Well, I think firstly, regulation is one. And two is infrastructure, right? But having said that, it doesn't mean that you can't start to explore and do the groundwork, because I feel that there is still a huge education gap for everyone to do tokenization of property. So, this year can be spent on actually filling that education gap and really understanding how that can be done. And I think the second part is really the public interest at this point in time. It's still very nascent. The great thing, obviously, is that a lot of people have gone into trading or investing into cryptocurrencies. So that adoption into the digital asset space has basically blown up in 2021 and will continue to do so in 2022. But I think in terms of the actual adoption into property tokens, that's something that is still going to take some time. So essentially do some homework for 2022 to get ready for 2023.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really agree with you. I think we sort of see that with NFTs, with a different class of investors entering sort of the art space. From a very traditional fine art perspective, NFT buyers are very different. I think that class of investor can start to transcend as well to other assets. So definitely agree with you on that. For Claus, what would you say to property developers here in Indonesia of why they shouldn't start tokenization of property this year? Or, to Marcus' point on regulation, are they able to explore raising in other jurisdictions and then, for a development, for example, in Indonesia?
Yeah, I also think regulation is the main point here. I think we've consulted something like 5 or 6 projects in Indonesia so far, and I think there is no straightforward way to tokenize legally in Indonesia. I think it can be done with consultation of the regulator and so on, but we haven't seen it yet, or we haven't been involved in any projects. So that might be one reason to wait, unless you have a powerful legal department. Otherwise, consider maybe Australia as an option. The other reason for maybe not moving forward is if you expect tokenization to be a way to more easily finance your construction projects, I think you should not get started on it. At this point, I see tokenization more as a way to make your existing assets more liquid and to digitize and automate your business, modernize your business, I would say, and bring it into the present time.
Are developers able to sort of source funds overseas through tokenization and build, in jurisdictions where basically the regulation for this type of asset is not clear yet?
Yeah.
Is that a possibility? Do you know?
To use another jurisdiction for it, it is a possibility, but of course it gets more expensive. So we only see that with larger projects, larger clients, I would say. Otherwise it gets prohibitively expensive.
And Will, what are your thoughts and advice, I guess, for property developers here in Indonesia looking to explore this space?
I think that if we look at it as the tokenizations, then probably a bit far. But if we look at it as I mentioned, infrastructure of business, then I think that this is the best timing. And I think that one thing that I wanted to share is we need to see it as a financial inclusions. When we say the financial inclusions, we should provide a way for us to accommodate investors and financial institutions and governments or regulators. But if we can try to bypass one of these group or entity, then it will not work. Like for example, if the system is actually designed not to pay proper tax or maybe some proper payments, then of course regulators and government, they will not welcome, right? But if we can design this infrastructure, even though it's a property tokenizations or something else, right? Then I think that people are actually waiting. Like when you look at this, what World Bank they wanted to pursue is financial inclusions. So without let any of these important stakeholder behind, a lot of even investors and also financial institutions and government, they want everyone can be in the same in the same place, and then they can somehow contribute what they can do. So for example, investors and financial institutions, what they want is the accessibilities and liquidity. And what government want is they wanted to make sure that they can protect investors and tax matters. So then like these two, pillars, we need to understand, we need to properly provide, and then probably, this year will be the best time if we can see it as a infrastructure of business, and it is about like building this like a gigantic and global ecosystem, then probably is the best time this year. Yeah.
Great. I think that sums up sort of my questions. I will move on to audience questions. But before that, I think, taking some common themes from what you guys have said, it does feel like neighbors around Indonesia, most notably Thailand, seem very advanced in this. And, it was highlighted that mainly driven by the government sector as well. So, from an association perspective, obviously that's a good indicator and something to take back to our regulators here to show them that our neighbors are starting to really start to take the lead, but also, get the tangible benefits either from a taxation perspective or from an efficiency perspective. So that's something I think that, and from what Claus has said, there has been obviously interest from, you have leads coming from Indonesia, and Marcus, you're obviously active servicing the Thailand space for property tokens, and also looking, because you are regulated here in Indonesia, I think if and when it starts to becoming possible for developers in Indonesia, and I think there are a lot of property developers, even people that I know that have asked me personally as well. So I think definitely it's a space that we, from an association perspective, will be looking to, put forward to regulators to highlight to them and to really drive the narrative a little bit stronger. Thank you for your time, for addressing my questions. I'll now move to the audience questions. And the first question I have is from Afan Gheffiro, and the question is for Will. The question is, can you kindly elaborate more on what you have done in Vietnam, where there is no regulatory environment to capture the asset tokenization? Was what you were referring to related to property or other assets?
Yeah, so basically, as I mentioned, there's no legal framework at the moment in Vietnam. So what we could do is we are not able to offer security tokens in Vietnam. What we can only do is we can offer in Singapore with our license. So what we could do is we can kind of a hybrid model like Toyota Prius. So we set up like a local SPV in Vietnam. And then what we could do is the foreign entities in Singapore can 100% own this one, so that we can only issue this digital format in Singapore. That is what we could do at the moment. When we work with partners in countries where there's no special legal framework for asset tokenizations. But however, some countries like Thailand, not only like government bonds and corporate bonds, the last year in November, I think Krung Thai Bank also offer a digital gold in digital formats, and they already offer and successfully sold this to the digital golds actually represent the actual underlying the gold's asset. So I think that now we could learn each other what is the right structure that we could utilize. But but I think the one that I can see is, if there's no legal framework, then we need to use a countries where we can use its like a legal framework. And if there is a legal framework, then we could just follow based on their local regulations.
Are you seeing that more and more often?
More often means like
more and more people wanting to do that. For example, what you said, like raise in Singapore and then have a vehicle that in Vietnam that deploys.
I think then maybe as a POC they could try to convince their local governments. Like for example, that is why we wanted to work with relatively big players in each region, because our purpose is, hey, let's do POC, using the Singapore as a like hub of maybe like Southeast Asia, and then they could try and learn, and based on the successful case, they can pitch this idea to their local government, and then we can partner together, and then we can build this regulated DeFi network together. So that is, I think, definitely we will see more cases like this. But I think the purpose for them is they want to show them like this is fine. They already have a good system to try, and then convince their local government to have the proper legal framework. And then once more countries can have proper legal framework, then the next thing will be how we can connect. And that is the next thing that I think that we could all consider. Yeah.
Sure. Next question is for Marcus. The question is from Musa Ibrahim. The question is, can STOs or RTS NFTs be used to take on loans at DeFi apps like Aave?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Thanks for that question. I think at this point in time, we're not really seeing that adoption just yet. But I guess the interoperability obviously can exist into the DeFi space. So depending on on the blockchain protocol that's being used, would then provide that interoperability. But for now, we're not seeing that kind of adoption. I think that's kind of really like a phase 2. I think the phase 1 is actually having these STOs or these kind of property tokens being available for kind of retail investors, and when there's enough liquidity for it to be then translated into the DeFi space as well. But that's kind of a very interesting point, and I think that would be a huge market in itself when it kicks off.
Yeah, definitely an interesting question.
Can I add a point to it?
Yes, sure, Claus.
Yeah, we see it also as a really huge potential thing that will happen. But I think actually it will happen later this year. So we see the first projects coming out that can do this now. There's a project called Centrifuge, working with Aave on DeFi lending, and we have a project also that we're working on, realestate.exchange, to create like a decentralized trading and also decentralized lending on real world assets. So it's coming quite soon.
And is your project the real estate marketplace? Is that something centralized or something sort of decentralized?
It has to be centralized to some degree due to the requirement for KYC and transfer restrictions, but it's as decentralized as we can make it.
And you're looking to integrate into, for example, other DEX, other DeFi protocols?
Yeah, like Aave, for instance. We're working with Aave on it, also with Balancer to facilitate the trading. We are not the only one. There are also other projects doing similar things.
And interestingly, when you do projects like that, when you're pitching to investors, do you find it's a very different pitch to a traditional, I guess, real estate off-plan type of investment?
So pitching to real estate investors or to VCs or?
Oh yeah, when you're launching your marketplace, are you targeting more retail investors or sort of institutions? Yeah. And is the sort of the sell very different because you have a DeFi angle?
Yeah, it's a good question. So initially it'll be targeting retail, and I think DeFi is mostly retail right now. But I think there's also a lot of institutional interest, and we see it. Speaking to Aave, they have a lot of institutional interest, and I think it's coming. But for us, we'll be starting with the retail.
Before we wrap it up, I wanted to sweep through to everyone to maybe share some final thoughts or any other thoughts that you might have missed or not have voiced yet to the audience. Maybe starting with yourself, Marcus.
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Was there anything else before we jump off that you wanted to share with the audience that we might have not had time to address?
No, I think that's it from my end. Thank you everyone for coming to this event. It's been great to present it here.
Great. Thanks, Marcus. Claus, was there any final takeaways that you wanted to share with the audience?
I think that I'd just like to add that I'm not so concerned about what we're doing in tokenization in terms of regulation, because typically or essentially we're working 100% within existing securities regulation, and we work with the regulators. So we are not trying to do stuff that is unregulated with stuff that is potentially securities or possibly securities, right? We know it's securities, 100% securities, and we fully embrace that, and we work with the regulators. And we work with them also to develop legislation or clarify legislation around this. So I think it's the risk for anyone engaging in this area here is much less than if you wanted to do something in the crypto space. And we see the crypto and the blockchain functionality really just as infrastructure enabling us to do new things here, but not as an important element in itself. Yeah, just wanted to add that. Thank you very much for inviting me here today.
Thanks, Claus. And Will?
Yeah, so like my last the comment is, I think that we are building this all together, and I think that like definitely in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia is one of the for us one of the most important market as well. And I think that like what we wanted to achieve is, as I mentioned, one, financial inclusions, and also I can definitely see the strengths of DeFi, but we really need to make sure that like whether some DeFi project is just for investors, and like it shouldn't just be just one particular group or entities. So it would be great if we could consider whether we can provide the accessibilities and democratizing this like market, and also at the same time what existing players can also take some benefit based out of this the ecosystem that we are building. Yeah, that way I'm sure that we'll be able to achieve what everyone wants. Yeah.
Thanks, Will. I might hand it back now to our host, Gheffiro.
Right. Thank you so much, Steve, for leading the panel discussion and also Q&A session that lasts for about 15 minutes. Well, honestly, I will be surprised that we are almost at the end of the event. For 2 hours straight, we have learned many things about tokenized property. Start from what tokenization is and end by how to create and launch a property token. I'm sure all of you here, audience, get a lot of insights and keen to try immediately. But just for a reminder, please do your own research first before you jump into tokenized property. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much, dear speakers, for all your brilliant insights. And also thank you, Steve, for moderate and lead the panel discussion. And of course, to all audience here that keep excited from the beginning to the end of event today. So see you on another event by Indonesian Blockchain Association and Coinvestasi. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.